Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very important and incredibly timely discussion about the Trump administration's plans for ethnically cleansing Gaza. Thank you so much to Yusuf Munayr and Nabil and everyone else at the Arab Center for organizing this discussion. My name is Shana Marshall. I am the Associate Director of the Institute for Middle East Studies at the George Washington University, and we are very happy to be co-sponsoring today's event. It's very difficult to tease out any sort of formal understanding of what this administration's plans are for Gaza really moving forward and how they will achieve their stated aims. But I know that today's speakers will provide us with much needed context and history and insight into what we might expect. And specifically what this means not just for the Palestinians, but also for the broader region and in terms of U.S. foreign policy moving forward. Since I am from the Institute for Middle East Studies at GW, I would like to put in a plug for you to check out our event lineup at the Institute for Middle East Studies. I think we can put that link in the chat. With that, I will turn it over to Yusuf Munayr, who is the head of the Palestine-Israel program and the senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you again so much to Yusuf and to all of our speakers today and for allowing us to co-sponsor this event with you. And thank you so much for all that you do on these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shana. Likewise, it's a pleasure to be hosting this alongside the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University. Good morning to everyone and welcome for those watching along this morning. My name is Yusuf Munayr, and we appreciate you joining us for this webinar, Implications of Trump's Ethnic Cleansing Plan for Gaza. President Donald Trump recently announced his plan for the Gaza Strip, which would include the displacement of the Palestinian population and some form of American ownership of Gaza. The call for displacement, repeated in a meeting with the Jordanian king in the White House in recent weeks, echoed the long-standing dreams of far-right elements in Israel and would have, of course, massive consequences for the region if implemented. As the ceasefire and exchange deal nears a crucial moment now between the first and second stage, we're glad to bring together this panel of experts to discuss the implications of the White House's plan for Gaza, how it will affect the region, and more. We'll try to address numerous questions, including the likelihood of this plan moving forward, what resistance it will meet from Palestinians as well as other countries throughout the region, how neighboring states view this issue and what the implications are for them, as well as the broader role of regional actors in this moment. So we're very fortunate to have a great group of experts to talk through all of these questions today and more. For today's conversation, we'll begin with 10 minutes of remarks from each panelist, followed by moderators' questions and Q&A from the audience. Please note that you don't need to wait until the Q&A portion to submit your questions to this morning's speakers. You can send in questions at any time using the Q&A feature here on Zoom or via email to events@arabcenterdc.org. Now, in the interest of time, I want to move directly to briefly introducing our guests in the order they will be presenting and then starting our conversation. First, Tahani Mustafa is Senior Palestine Analyst at the International Crisis Group. Sean Yom, Associate Professor of Political Science at Temple University and a Senior Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Nancy Okail is President and CEO of the Center for International Policy. And Michael Barnett, University Professor of International Affairs at George Washington University. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being with us today. Tahani, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Yusuf. I'll just say a little bit about the plan itself and in terms of some of the kind of contradictory elements to it before getting into what could potentially be Palestinian reactions to that. So I think, so far we know that many details of the plan are still quite unclear, but I think the contours, at least, in Trump's mind, are becoming slightly clearer especially in recent days. We know that Trump wants Hamas to surrender hostages immediately, according to some of his latest statements, and that Gaza needs to be cleared out. And neither of these obviously have anything to do with the ceasefire agreement. And, that seems to fall very much in line with the way that Trump often tends to upturn the normal rules of diplomacy. But more significantly, Trump doesn't really see Gazans as having any part of, I think, what you can describe as effectively what is amounting to a real estate project, at least in terms of how he's envisioning any sort of future for Gaza. And, just to note that this isn't something that, that has just kind of come out of nowhere or since, Trump's ascension to office. This was something that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who negotiated the Abraham Accords in his previous administration, again, just to remind those that weren't familiar, that the Abraham Accords themselves, absolutely no guarantees for the Palestinians with regards to their self-determination. Jared Kushner had floated the idea of redeveloping Gaza on the 15th of February last year, when he called Gaza valuable real estate and said that Gazans should be moved to the Negev. So Trump's plan hasn't really come out of nowhere in that sense. And I think more importantly, Israel sees that as very much in its interests. I think they definitely do see synergy there in the sense of the depopulation of Gaza, which, has been some of Israel's more maximalist war aims, in terms of, the kinds of discussions we were hearing from segments of Israeli society and even politicians from the outset of this recent onslaught, where we were hearing talks of resettlement and completely, cleansing Gaza of its population. And arguably, I think what we have seen over the last 17 months is an extension of Israeli policy since 2007, where the Israelis were very clear that they looked to make Gaza completely uninhabitable for its population. And they weren't that far off come 2020. So, that's just worth considering right now that, I think especially for the Israelis and Netanyahu, in many ways, Trump can almost be considered to be their sort of fairy godmother, right? Granting him and his right-wing allies what they only previously dared to imagine, but couldn't actually risk saying out loud. And since the 7th of October, we've obviously seen Israel accelerate those plans, especially in the sense of making Gaza completely uninhabitable, unable to sustain life. That has been a very clear goal from the outset. But Trump's plan could, in effect, make this Israel's formal stated goal, and effectively help commit the US to reconstructing Gaza along the lines favored by Israel. But needless to say, this plan ignores all existing diplomacy, international law, never mind the will of the Palestinians and Arab states, who have just, as you mentioned, Yusuf, have proposed this recent plan to rebuff Trump's displacement plans for the Palestinians, again, which have been effectively rejected by the Israelis and the US. And, this plan really does have no basis in international law whatsoever. In many ways, it does create some issues with regards to what this actually means with in terms of displacement, straightforward occupation, and more importantly, what this actually means for Palestinians themselves, especially those in Gaza. Now, in the context of Gaza, we know that Gazans especially, are not going to go willingly. Even those that did have the opportunity to leave the Strip at the start of this onslaught were very adamant on staying on their land. And I think that's something that the international community seemed to seriously underestimate, is the commitment the Palestinians have to their land. We were hearing, when we were doing interviews with those in Gaza, especially those that were unwilling to evacuate, even though they had the opportunity to, that they would rather die on their land than live the indignity of living as a refugee anywhere else. And that sentiment has not changed. If anything, I think that's become far more strengthened over the last 17 months now. And more importantly, we've seen that Israel has failed to achieve any of its objectives, especially those of destroying Palestinian resistance, which in many ways, Hamas is pretty much emblematic of. It is the last vestige of organized Palestinian resistance. And Israel has failed to destroy them in any capacity, whether that's as a military wing, a political entity, or as a civic administration. And it's very clear that Hamas will resist this fiercely, along with other Palestinians. Hamas has gone on an incredibly large recruiting spree, and that has nothing to do with commitment to its dogma and everything to do with the fact that for many Palestinians right now, engaging in armed resistance is really the only way that they can assert their right to stay on their land and to effectively counter Israel's complete impunity that the international community continues to allow it to enjoy. And Hamas and Palestinian resistance more broadly has demonstrated that they have the capability to maintain a long-term resistance. And that sort of goes back to how there's been a lot of misunderstanding in terms of how Palestinian resistance functions and organizes itself, where they're not reliant on external imports, and where they do have sort of, in many ways, kind of innovative ways of being able to repurpose Israeli munitions, being able to use incredibly primitive materials and improvised devices. So it's been very clear that Hamas and Palestinian resistance, or more broadly, do have the capability to provide some kind of pushback to that. It's also unclear, really, in terms of the logistics of Trump's plan, how you're actually going to be able to remove those people from the land. Does that mean that you're going to see starvation? Are they going to be forcibly pushed out through even more violent mechanisms? I mean, again, the logistics of that haven't really been thought out or discussed, but in any case, to assume that there won't be pushback would be incredibly naive. But just to bring this to the broader issue of Palestine, this isn't just an issue that, Trump's plan is not just something that will have implications for Gaza, but also the West Bank. This could actually set a precedent. And this has been something that even regional states, especially Jordan, have been quite worried about since the outset. And I think we already have a speaker that will sort of obviously go into this in more depth. But it's the precedent that this then sets for Israeli plans for the West Bank as well, where really Israeli expansionist policies, I guess you could say the West Bank is really the heart of Israeli expansionist policies when they talk about Judea and Samaria, and where even today we are already seeing the process of mass internal displacement already happening directly through military action and indirectly through the destruction of entire localities, where there's quite literally nothing left of these neighborhoods. We're seeing the largest numbers of displacement since 1967, and where you're effectively starting to see what even the Israeli media are describing as mini Gazas, or the Gazification of the West Bank. And so the creation of displacement camps potentially for Gazans, if these plans are to go ahead in places like Jordan and Egypt, which I think has been some of the places that Trump has mentioned, that could likely facilitate the external displacement of West Bank Palestinians. And this is, again, something that even intergovernmental organizations have been quite concerned about over the last few months, especially with an impending Trump administration. I remember these were policy discussions floating around back in November. So the damage that this could effectively do, and I'm just going to leave this on a more broader note, but the damage that this could effectively do, to the international order, undermining international law, would be even more extreme than what we've already seen happen with Israel's campaign since the 7th of October. And even Trump's floating of this dangerous, extreme, morally depraved plan has opened space for more extreme elements within Israeli politics to act. And they are acting at the moment. And you can definitely see that not just in the context of Gaza, but again, eyes need to be on the West Bank as well.
Thank you very much for that, Tahani. I want to move now to Sean, who will be talking to us about implications of these proposals from the White House for Jordan.
Great, thanks, Yusuf. And let me just emphasize again to underscore a theme that I think the other speakers as well will accentuate, that things on the ground are moving so fast and so unpredictably. And it's been some time since I think 2003 where we've witnessed, in which we have witnessed a period of U.S. Middle East policy or policy making that has been so stricken with day-to-day uncertainty, as in none of us know what's going to happen or who's going to say what on the next day. And that matters especially for countries like Jordan, which is whose politics I will speak about briefly now, because as it stands, if nothing else changes, right, what we know is this: as it stands, if the plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza and depopulate its residents onto Egypt and Jordan are to go ahead as the US and Israeli governments have articulated, then what we will be looking at in the next few years from that plan, again, as it stands, is the potential destabilization and the evisceration of the Jordanian state. Right, this is the beginning of the end, I think, for the Hashemite kingdom if the plan goes forward. So this is the sort of crisis with existential implications, and there are a few reasons why. Go back in time a month ago to February 11th when King Abdullah met with President Trump, and if you saw those news clips of the king speaking at the meeting, and you could see his discomfort. I mean, his palpable physical displeasure about having to talk about this issue. The reason I bring this up is because if you go back in Jordanian history and you go back to like the night of June 9th or 10th when King Hussein has to make the announcement that the Jordanians have lost the West Bank to Israel. You go back to 1990 or 1991 when King Hussein again has to make news about what's happening between Iraq and Kuwait to the Jordanian people, or to 2003 when King Abdullah has to somehow justify the Iraq war to his people as well. I have never seen a Jordanian king be this uncomfortable in the presence of American power than February 11th. And I think this, for me, it emphasizes just how deeply threatening the Gaza depopulation plan and ethnic cleansing plan, rather, is for Jordan. The Gaza crisis embodies what we would call the ultimate unwinnable foreign policy strategy for Jordan. It cannot fight and it cannot flee. It has to sit there and take it, and there are a few reasons why. Number one is that even before the 2023-24 Gaza war broke out, Jordan was already one of the smallest, weakest countries in the region. It already had one of the smaller populations, smaller than Tunisia, for instance. Only Bahrain and Palestine itself had smaller populations than the entire Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Most of Jordan's citizenry, or the majority of Jordan's citizenry, is of Palestinian origin, and there are an additional over 650,000 Palestinians in Jordan, originally from Gaza, who came after the 67 war, who were never granted Jordanian nationality. So the plurality of Jordan's population already is of Palestinian origin. And as we know, since they came to Jordan because of the 48 and 67 wars, they are not there by choice. So we're dealing with a country whose society is a patchwork of forced displacement already. Jordan already had one of the smallest, most fragile economies in the region prior to the Gaza war. 21% adult unemployment, 40% youth unemployment, which makes it one of the worst countries in the world to find a job if you're between the ages of 16 and 25 and on the job market. A 24% poverty rate. That's a non-refugee poverty rate, right? Which is incredible to me. And Jordan as well was dealing with still 500,000 Syrian refugees that resided in Jordan, and even today are still wondering, is it safe to go back to Syria, since that is another crisis blowing up across another border of Jordan whose implications are still unfolding. So amidst all of these structural vulnerabilities, why does the idea that the US and Israel can, by fiat, ethnically cleanse Gaza and saddle Jordan with perhaps half of its Palestinian population, maybe that would be 800,000 people, like, why would that be bad for Jordan? And I think it's very important to emphasize why this Gaza plan has, again, this term is used often in Jordan, but this is one of the few times I want to defend its proper use. Existential implications for Jordanian stability. So the Gaza plan has these sorts of far-reaching ramifications because it broaches this idea that the Jordanians have long called the Alternative Homeland Project. In Arabic, we would call this Al-Watan al-Badil. Some of us know us by this name. This is an idea that began generations ago in the 70s, fronted by the Israeli right, and then later picked up by their allies in the US, that calls for Jordan to become the alternative state for Palestine, that Israel should be free to annex all of the Palestinian territories, including the West Bank, And Palestinians would all Palestinians would not only lose the right of return, but those Palestinians that would be displaced from all territories annexed by Israel would simply just go to the Hashemite kingdom instead. That would be the new Palestine. So Jordan, in effect, would become Palestine. This was long a niche idea among the Israeli right and their American allies. The Gaza plan makes it real, because Jordanians fear that if Gaza is permanently empty to Palestinians, ethnically cleansing the West Bank will be the next step. It's I wouldn't even call it a slippery slope, because we're already on the slope and everyone's already slipping. It is simply the next logical step in the sequence of Israeli expansionism, and the sort of the pipe dream of the particular millennial version of Zionism, which has taken hold among most of the mainstream parties in Israeli politics. So then the next logical question we might ask is, so, okay, if Jordan becomes the new Palestine by fiat, and the West Bank is next, what will this do to Jordan? It will do a lot of things to the Hashemite kingdom, and none of them are going to be good. So the reasons why Jordanians, who seldom agree with their king, who often disagree with each other over virtually every issue you can imagine, corruption, unemployment, privilege, inequality, who gets to live where, which ministers are corrupt, should there be democracy in the kingdom tomorrow? There is disagreement up and down the board in Jordan between state and society, between Jordanians and non-Jordanians, between rich and poor. But it's astonishing that all of Jordan is united in denouncing the idea of depopulating Gaza because of the fear of the alternative homeland project. That everyone fears that this will destroy the country. Number one, it will definitively end the possibility of Palestinian self-determination centered on the West Bank and Gaza, and this has long been a pillar of Jordanian thinking, shared by the monarchy and people alike. It would saddle the Jordanian economy, already one of the region's weakest, with Gaza alone, at least 500,000 new refugees, and then millions more from the West Bank. It would probably magnify social tensions between Palestinians and non-Palestinian tribes in Jordanian society. There have been episodes of ugly conflict between the two groups in the past, and those memories will be dredged up. It will undermine the Hashemite monarchy itself, because with the loss of Gaza and then the impending loss of the West Bank to Israel, the Hashemite king can no longer claim to be the custodian over Jerusalem's holy sites, or holy Muslim sites, which has been a role claimed by the Hashemites since 1948. So the prospect of transferring Gaza's Palestinians onto Jordan signals that all these destructive outcomes are in play. And this is why Jordanian diplomacy has been on war footing for the last few months. Even before Trump acceded to power. At September 2024, Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi, this made sort of waves in the pan-Arab media, speaking on the king's behalf, publicly stated that Jordan saw any collective Israeli effort to expel Palestinians onto Jordan as an act of war, and as a reason to revisit the 1994 peace treaty with Israel. So those are as strong of words, I think, that any Jordanian official can utter vis-a-vis the prospects of these sorts of ethnic cleansing plans. I think, and to close up, because I think I've conveyed the sentiment very clearly, how this is a terrible idea for Jordan, that this is also a very paradoxically destructive idea in many ways, because Jordan has served a particular strategic purpose for the United States and Israel for generations now, which is to be the moderate Arab stable, or like the moderate Arab oasis of stability and reliable state that protects the eastern flank of the Israeli state, right? So the Israelis, may not love the Jordanians, but they certainly love them more than the Syrians and the Iraqis and other Arab states that they've dealt with over generations since the 67 war. So the requirement for that particular strategy is that Jordan has to be stable, it has to be coherent, and it has to have a monarchy that understands its society and that governs the country reasonably well. Well, by foisting Palestinians from Gaza onto Jordan through utter coercion, and by bringing the alternative homeland project one step closer to fruition, then both the US and Israel are ironically destabilizing the kingdom. It's making it a weaker state. It's making it a less reliable partner. This is not good. I mean, for ignoring the Jordanian perspective, this is also terrible for the Israeli long-term perspective about wanting a neighborhood of partner Arab states for which it has struck peace treaties with and that it can rely upon for security coordination. So beyond that baffling prospect, lies the more imminent one in which, again, ethnic cleansing will be extremely destructive for the Hashemite kingdom. But why the Israeli government in particular pursues this, knowing that it could potentially destroy Jordan itself, is, to my mind, one of the more puzzling things about this entire tragicomic episode of Middle East policymaking. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much for all of that, Sean. We will turn now to Nancy Okail, who will talk to us about implications of these ideas for Egypt.
Well, thank you so much, Yusuf and Shana, for hosting us for this really timely and dangerous topic that we're talking about. And I mean, I really appreciate the eloquence that Tahani and Sean explained the perspectives from the Palestinian side and also the implications on the Jordanian side. I think to try to provide some clarity on the dynamics that are happening right here, I'm just going to start by Trump's proposed plan, and Tahani has already provided the broad lines of it and the problems of it, and it's I'm just going to elaborate a little bit about what other problems are there with it, and then why the Egyptian state and President Sisi is adamantly standing against this, and then about his alternative plan that he presented in the summit that took place in Cairo, and the endorsement of some Arab states and the Arab League, and then the position of Palestinians for it. Now, let's start by the really basic elements for any plan to really have a viability that would provide a realistic solution. Well, first of all, it has to have the element of the acceptance of the Palestinian people. This sounds basic, but it seems for a lot of people that this is absent from the equation. Second, it has to abide by international law. It has to have a political path leading ultimately to end the occupation, if we're really looking into a real solution. It has to have a financial viability and a capacity to implement. Of course, most of those elements are absent from the calculations of Trump, which, as Tahani again pointed out, is not so far from what was proposed by Kushner. And basically, to put it simply, it's just a real estate construction plan. The perspective of Trump that you can throw money at a problem and it will be resolved. I mean, no one need to say it was after 15 months was the genocide in Gaza, in his really formulating it into that ethnic cleansing. There's the different terms that people prefer to use, but it's very obvious what is this doing to the Palestinians and the forced displacement. And thinking, I mean, both, I mean, in the Trump's plan, and then I'm going to talk about the Egypt plan, it's they're presenting it as an apolitical process. I mean, that this is something about reconstruction, displacing people, putting them back or not, in the case of Trump. Now, for Egypt, it is very clear why they would reject it for different reasons. Well, first of all, let's talk about the Egyptian people. This is something that is absolutely unacceptable for the Egyptian people, for the history, for the cause of the Palestinians and their displacement and rights. Now, for President Sisi and the Egyptian army as an institution, this is an existential threat from their perspective in different ways. Well, first of all, I mean, it politically, having Sisi seen as the president who ultimately really dissolved the whole Palestinian case and allowed the displacement is there's no way to even explain the extent of the opposition and reaction that he would get, not just from Egypt, but from the rest of, I mean, the Arab world. Second, there's also an issue of capacity. Egypt has been barely able to handle all the counterterrorism and the conflicts that internally existing within Sinai and others. It's like the capacity for securing this is also another concern. The other concern also, I mean, like, what would this lead, mainly in terms of the friction between the Egyptian people and the presidency, and then also like the whole concern of like the displacement and movement of Palestinians into Egypt with, I mean, connections with the Egyptian people. This is like the biggest fear, not just for the Egyptians, but also for the Israelis. I mean, it's like, it's not a secret that the Israelis appreciate the presidency of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. They support it. They see it as like he is an ally and a partner. And some of them, at least the adults in the room, understand that this actually is not going to be in favor of the security of Israel as we know it, given the setup. And as Sean alluded, is like, even though it's like there's a huge opposition from the Egyptian people to the president, and like in Jordan as well, this is the first time we see the unity of like the Jordanians to what the king's position is, and the same thing is for Egypt as well, for different reasons, but there is an understanding of what kind of threat this represents. So politically, it is very difficult to see that the Egyptian government accepting it. Viability in terms of capacity and competence to do it is not there. And the threat it represents to the Camp David Accord, and is like having like moving them to Sinai or elsewhere, it is like would make Sinai as a linchpin for conflict and between Egypt or people who are in Egypt and Israel. Now, what are the tools that Trump has in terms of pressuring Egypt and pressuring Jordan? For Egypt, and it's like Trump openly says, like, I'm going to stop aid to Egypt. Well, first of all, technically, again, the aid that Egypt receives, the $1.3 billion in security assistance, this is part of the the Camp David Accords. I mean, like, and parallel to that is the $3 billion that Israel receives. So stopping that would breach part of like this agreement. Now, the other thing is like in the bigger scheme of things, stopping 1.3, of course, there is a strategic and political value beyond just the value of this amount. But in terms of how it will affect Egypt, Egypt has reached a point that we have $155 billion in foreign debt. So $1.3 billion in the bigger scheme of that is not does not constitute the biggest threat. And again, like that does not undermine like the political value of the US stopping military aid to Egypt. So this is the situation of what Trump is proposing, why it's problematic. I mean, and again, like I agree with everything that Sean and Tahani said. Now let's move to what Egypt is proposing as an alternative plan. Well, first of all, I mean, I don't think it's a secret or hard to like gather that this is a desperate way of saying, please don't ethnic cleanse the Palestinians. We have an alternative, and it's like a rushed one that we're not just rejecting Trump's proposal, but we also have an alternative plan. But let's look at the elements of this plan. It's a plan over 5 years that is going to cost $53 billion. It's going to be on 3 phases. The first phase is going to be 6 months, and they call it the recovery phase. The second phase is the reconstruction or restoration phase. And the first phase is like for $3 billion. The second phase is like 10 billion, and then 20 billion for the third phase. And it's like the phases goes into movement of Palestinians into temporary units that they're going to have over like the coastal line until they have the reconstruction corridor that absorbs, like the reconstruction, or rehabilitation of 60,000 houses and building another 200,000 permanent ones. And then like the whole process of moving. In terms of administrating this phase is that the Palestinian Authority would be supervising a committee for reconstruction and development of Gaza that would be formed of technocrats who would be handling this. And the PA supervision would be temporary until this phase is over and they retreat back. And then we go into a phase where other coalitions and members go into a political process, only if it excludes also Hamas. I mean, and this is part of the plan. Let's look at the optics. I mean, of course, is it a good plan? Certainly, particularly in light and comparing it to what Trump is proposing. Second, it does not include like the displacement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. And third, I mean, it's like it provides like the grants the authority to Palestinian, at least, I mean, political power, regardless of how we see what this power, would it be accepted by the Palestinian people? Is it inclusive? And also it includes that Egypt and Jordan is going to train police members or forces in Gaza, I mean, for the security and stability of the things. Now, let's look at the optics. Well, first of all, it was telling that both Saudi Arabia and the UAE were not present in that summit. And at least like if we can infer from that, I mean, it's questionable about the level of commitment to such plan. And yes, later on, the Arab League endorsed the plan, but there's a little bit of like lack of clarity of how it would be financed and how it would be carried on. And then most recently, I think it was yesterday, Tahani Mustafa, the prime minister in the West Bank, I mean, expressed like his endorsement and acceptance of the plan. Like these are all good elements, but the question is like, are they viable? They are presenting this, and maybe for good reason, again, this plan as an apolitical process, I mean, which is necessary at this point, like to avoid the election. But there are issues with this plan. First of all, it has an assumption that this is all based on the assumption that there's a two-state solution. This is the first political part. Second, it assumes the capacity of Egypt to be leading this process in terms of handling it and management and the police forces. And just to give you a perspective and a context that gives us an indication whether this is viable or not. Last year, the UAE had a deal with Egypt providing with $53 billion to acquire the Ras Al Hikma, which is a coastal city in Egypt. The size of Ras Al Hikma is 180 square kilometers. That's half of the size of Gaza, I mean 365 roughly. Over the past years, well, first of all, what they were trying to do is displace the population that is in that inhabited the tribes that inhabited Ras Al Hikma. And because, I mean, the UAE investment there is to turn it again into a hub for tourism and investment. Until today, and up to actually last week, they have been struggling to move the population and the tribal, I mean, community that was there into another place that they call Ras Shams, I think. And just a few days ago, the Prime Minister Madbouli went to visit there to try to reconcile, and he was met by people throwing rocks at his car and protest. The police responded by arresting people and tear gas. we're talking about a size of a population that is 10,000 people and half of the size of Gaza. And those are Egyptians. And this is local. So this is just to put things into perspective, what this means in relation on how to handle that. This is not to undermine or kind of discredit the Egyptian plan. It is also just to explain and highlight the challenges that are there, what's realistic and what's not, the political past, the assumption that this is including a past or assuming that the two-state solution is still alive and viable and could be implemented, assuming that the Palestinians would accept it, and also would accept it internally and domestically, and maybe Tahani would delve more into this, is like how the PA would be, and to what extent accepted to be the authority, at least managing the first 6 months. Of course, I just gave you a timeline for the past year in Ras al-Hikman, what it means, and thinking of in 5 years, you're going to be able to implement this plan, particularly just to give you another context. Right now, there are 50 billion tons of rubble in Gaza. In 2021, there was 1 million ton of rubble. It took a year to remove it. So compared to that, it's like 50 times of that size to be removed and all. Is it complex? People understand this complexity. And this is, again, this is not to write off this plan, but we also need to understand, for this to happen, we have to have a strong buy-in from all Arab states. We have a financial viability in order to be implemented, and a realistic view of the capacity of Egypt to handle all this, assuming with all this that Israel is just going to be sitting on the side watching this playing out. So these are the different realities on the ground. Now, at the same time, there are mixed signals from the United States. So just yesterday, the United States approved almost 1 billion arms sales to Egypt. It was divided into 2 tranches, 625, that is about the fast missile crafts, update and modernization, and the rest of 304 is about just radars, surveillance equipment, infrared optics for better vision. So for just as recent as yesterday, as February 5th, for the United States to approve a 1 billion deal, this for the fleet that is actually from Lockheed Martin, and at the same time still going into the direction of what Trump is claiming, that this plan is still there. He rejected the plan that was proposed by Egypt. It just gives you a mixed signal, which is very symptomatic of this period. Just to close down, again, treating the situation as an apolitical situation, that we could do it without the financial capacity and the security capabilities and the support of the United States as well. This is not going to take us anywhere. And it's completely removed, the heart of the problem was ending the occupation. So this is the view from there.
Thank you so much for that, Nancy. We will turn now to Michael Barnett to talk to us about implications for U.S. policy.
It's kind of hard to figure out how to follow up on all this. And I almost feel like, everybody needs a little break from the dismal, but it's not going to be me. Anyway, I want to begin by, in many ways, just sort of reflecting on this moment. It's only been 6 weeks that the Trump administration came into office, and here we are talking about something that everybody initially greeted as absurdist, as something out of the crazy mind of Trump, but it's now taken on a very serious reality. And in many ways, what it reminded me of was this TV show when I was a lad called Candid Camera, and it's been rebooted since the 60s. But essentially, it consists of a set piece in which a stranger or acquaintance does something outrageous to an unsuspecting person. And the viewers are all in on the joke, but not the unsuspecting person. And then we get to watch this whole thing play out where the target is increasingly angry, confused, or gullible. Either way, it's supposed to make for great TV. And after the scene reaches a point of complete and utter ridiculousness, the person is then led on the joke, which they either, respond as a good sport or not. And I have, I keep being reminded of that TV series these days, but I also did whenever Trump makes an appearance or posts something or says something, because initially it's almost like this must be a joke. This is so outside the realm of everyday rationality, so absurd, a term that many in this webinar have said so far, and so monstrous that we cannot believe that Trump is serious, and we keep waiting for the idea that this is somehow a joke. And then he releases promotional videos like the one he recently did with he and Bibi sitting on a beach drinking margaritas. And we think, well, this is really just adding to the comical and absurdist element. But he's not joking, and we're never woken up. And this is happening again for Trump's Mar-a-Lago on the Gaza. It's absurdist theater, but yet again, it's serious. And rather than treating his proposal as simply macabre and dangerous, and I think everybody so far is treating it as the kind of real estate vision from hell, it should be taken seriously. And I think that requires us to do a couple of things. The one is to recognize that this is not somehow a shot that's out of the blue, that there have been steps that have built up to this moment. And it's more than just simply Kushner's audition as the biggest and most evil disaster capitalist of all time. The first precedent and series of prior steps has been the U.S. as enabler all the way. The U.S. has been an enabler for decades, and its willingness to be the Garden of Israel continued in Gaza. Biden demonstrated no willingness to stop Israel at any point. He established one red line after another that Israel continued to blow past, and then there would be some kind of apology issued, excuse issued by Biden or someone else in the administration. And, I'm sitting here wondering, which is that if Israel during the Biden term had begun to push Gazans out in the name of a rebuilding, would a Biden or maybe a Harris administration have stopped it? And I have to say, probably not. And I find, that itself has certainly enabled the Israelis to think these grand thoughts. And the other precedent is that Israel is a one-state reality. It is a single state. It's a single state that is, and no one really talks about it these days, but that has certainly the qualities of an apartheid state. And one of the questions that has been haunting Israel for several years is how it begins to rule over a near majority of Palestinians that Israel is viewed as a threat to its existence. Gaza, there was already a sense that there should be so-called transfer before Gaza, but after Gaza, most Israelis believe that the Palestinians have to go. And whether it is Israel's current plan to remove the Palestinians from the river to the sea, everything that's going on right now with the Trump plan can certainly be read as it will be one of its major effects. Trump's plan can be read in this way as an attempt to capitalize on the opportunity for his own profit, even as he presents this in a surreal moment as a humanitarian gesture for the Palestinians. As he says with, fake crocodile tears, this is a an awful place to live, and we're just going to make the Palestinian lives better. But but in no moment are the Palestinians invited to maybe stay and be part of Mar-a-Lago in Gaza, nor are they even invited to visit. So I think I, like everybody else that's spoken before me, takes the plan quite seriously. And it may not be executed to perfection in terms of Trump's dream, but the broad notion is very alive and well, as I think already has been talked about by several of the participants. Ethnic cleansing and forced displacement is on the table. The question has often been how this will occur, and there's now this uncertainty about who will be the so-called owner of Gaza. When I think about Trump's relationship to Gaza, I'm increasingly reminded of King Leopold and his rule over the Belgian Congo, in which the Belgian Congo is not really the property rights of Belgium, but rather is King Leopold. And if it really is to be a real estate deal, the presumption then is, I think, Trump properties or Kushner properties with the backing of Saudi Arabia become many on the board of this new Riviera on the Gaza. So I do think that there is increasingly a very sobering reality to what Trump wants to do, and the idea that he will take control, or the Israelis will take control over Gaza, that the Palestinians must leave. I think those are still broad and accepted tenets by the Trump administration about how this is supposed to work. I also want to note that the Israelis are also quite serious about the plan. Now, there might have been some incredulity, and they may or may not have been tipped off in advance about what Trump was going to say. But there's nothing necessarily to cause friction between the ideas that Gazans should be relocated and their own idea about what should be done about Palestinians. And as Tahani has said, Israelis are seeing this as a green light, that they don't know whether Trump will help them, but he certainly won't stop them. And so for any plans they have about forced displacement, maybe not Gaza today, it's happening in the West Bank, but the idea that Palestinians should be cleansed from the river to the sea, I think is a very serious possibility. I recently had conversations with several Israelis who at least present themselves to be in the thick of these conversations in Israel. So it is an active consideration among Israelis, maybe not how to accommodate Trump, but really how to actually take advantage of the moment. And the broad wind of the discussions is very much that this should be done. This is needed to be done, not, of course, for the Palestinians, but really for the Israelis. There's an agreement, as one interlocutor said, that Trump is right. Really, Gaza's never been a place for the Palestinians. It's not a very, livable scenario. But he didn't choose to mention that maybe the Israelis had a hand in making this such a miserable place to live. And he said then that, and he sees himself as on the left, maybe the Palestinians should be moved to the West Bank, because that would give a new Palestinian state some viability. And because there would be so many moving to the West Bank, he also added Jordan would have to actually give up a lot of territory to the new Palestinian state as well, which also plays and reinforces Sean's point about the kind of existential crisis that could be unleashed by any of these plans. He even sort of answered the question about what to do with all the rubble. And he said 50 billion tons in this context could be used to create barrier islands. So it could actually make that Riviera on the Gaza even more attractive as you create these islands, resorts just offshore. So, people are thinking, you might say it's absurd, but they would be saying they're just trying to think creatively as a way to instrumentalize this plan for the broad purpose of ethnic cleansing. And I just want to reinforce that, as several have suggested, this plan might not have left the barn, but it's raring to go. And in fact, it's important to see many of the actions and statements as providing the pretext, as greasing the wheels of this horrendous, monstrous, illegal, and inhuman plan to forcibly displace Palestinians. If this is the case, and I think it is, and I detect widespread agreement, at least on this panel, then I think we really need to cease talking about these big plans that we often have, or I hear many people talk about. The two-state solution, a confederation, the Arab plan. There are others that are in the wind. And the problem is that these plans are terrific if you really enjoy tilting at windmills, because they're not going to happen. And as a consequence, everybody is, playing this game of fantasy solution, when in fact, currently, what's taking place for the Palestinians is a road to hell. And so what needs to be done, and I have felt this way quite passionately for a while, is that rather than keeping, spinning castles in the air, there needs to be much greater consideration of how to protect the Palestinians here and now. From the humanitarian perspective, this is about protection. I don't hear a lot of conversation using a protection discourse, but I think it's time that we stop thinking about ultimate solutions that might satisfy everybody and start dealing with the reality in which the Palestinians desperately need protection. We've known this over the last several years. It's been punctuated by the last 18 months. And so we need to think about the protection strategies. What would they be? Well, part of it is then to begin to think about what might be available. And I'm not going to begin to suggest that it will be easy. I'm not to begin to suggest that they will be effective. But part of it will be putting into place possible costs on Israel and, yes, the US. Let's think about what those might be. It's important that we need to note that while Trump and the Israelis might dehumanize Palestinians and believe that they have no rights, in fact, they have rights. A lot of them are rights under refugee law. A lot of them are rights as rights under self-determination. And while Trump wants to believe that they can be evicted as if it's eminent domain, in fact, they have rights that accord them the right to stay. Those need to be mobilized and reinforced by the international community. I would say start preparing legal briefs for the ICJ and the ICC. And those would include, if Trump goes along with this, the possibility of indictment for crimes against humanity against the Trump administration. I mean, that really is the gravity of what we're talking about. How is this plan going to be enacted? Well, Trump has said there will not be any U.S. force used, but it's impossible to imagine that somehow the Palestinians would voluntarily agree to leave. And so force will be used, possibly, most likely by the Israelis, but who knows about U.S. forces? They may be used for that purpose. And so mobilize American human rights, civil society organizations to make sure that U.S. forces are off the table for this purpose in advance, not when the forces are already in movement to Israel. And also to reinforce something that Tahani had mentioned, Palestinians have a right of armed resistance. That's something that was largely given up by Arafat in exchange for Oslo. But if the Palestinians have no external protection, then the right of armed resistance must be considered as a legitimate alternative and legitimate to the extent that that resistance takes place within international human rights law. And those who support this right are largely within the contours of international law. But don't rely on me. You should consult your legal advisor. My point then is that think about protection now, because protection after this plan has been enacted will be too late. So these protection policies must be thought in terms of prevention. And none of this will be easy, but nevertheless, it is, I think, the only alternative to simply becoming a bystander to a crime against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and to all of you for your introductory comments. We're going to move to Q&A, and I'm going to present each of you with a question related to what you had discussed in your introductory comments. And if you can keep your responses to a minute or so, that would be great. Then we'll move on to audience Q&A. Please do send in your questions if you have them for our viewers to the chat feature here on Zoom or via email to events@arabcenterdc.org. Tahani, I want to start with you. One of the things that has been discussed as part of the Egyptian plan and elsewhere is this question of who is going to sort of govern or administer Gaza throughout the process of reconstruction. And there's obviously a lot of different perspectives on that. What stands in the way of some sort of agreement on a Palestinian administration that looks different than Hamas or the PA or some combination of independence or what have you, taking a degree of responsibility for Gaza during a period of reconstruction? Can you briefly outline for us what stands in the way of that coming forward?
Mahmoud Abbas. It's as simple as that. He has been the biggest impediment to any initiative in terms of any Palestinian thinking about what an administrative entity should look like in Gaza that doesn't include himself and his two lieutenants, Majid Faraj and Hussein al-Sheikh. There have been different plans floated around in terms of the kind of Palestinian administration. Most of those have had the buy-in of the Palestinian factions, including Hamas. However, the biggest, objectors have been largely coming from not just Mahmoud Abbas, but also Fatah generally. They want to see a reinstatement of the PA. You can have it reformed. It doesn't have to be under the same, people currently heading it, but there needs to be that unification, institutional political unification under the PA. And to some degree, you can kind of understand why, right? If you have a separate administration in Gaza, suddenly Gaza sort of shifts the center of political gravity, right? Where all money is then funneled to Gaza, which then kind of leaves the PA in a precarious situation in the context of the West Bank. That really does nothing for unification, either politically or institutionally. Again, you're separating the territories. You're not talking about occupied territories. You're talking about them as two separate entities, which, doesn't, again, bode well for Palestinians. And then, the other issue is also this idea about the reinstatement of the PA. Unfortunately, for many in the international community, the PA is really the only entity that can provide any sort of administrative committee in Gaza with that kind of veneer of legitimacy, or at least that seems to be the position so far, especially from those in the Northern Hemisphere.
Thank you very much for that, Sean. you talked about the existential nature of the threat that would face Jordan. You also talked about sort of the importance of Jordan as a partner to the United States for U.S. policy and how that's sort of been a pillar of U.S. policy in the region for many years now. I wanted to ask you to sort of comment on something we saw coming out of the meeting between Trump and King Abdullah. You noted how awkward that was and how difficult it was for everybody really to watch. But immediately after that, there was a video released by the White House about 60 seconds long of President Trump delivering what he said was a message to the people of Jordan, speaking to them about how wonderful their king was. How do you read all of this and how the Trump administration is thinking about U.S.-Jordan relations as it speaks of the plan that it has for Gaza?
Yeah, that video that the President Trump released putatively praising King Abdullah and addressed at the Jordanian people was framed rhetorically as a compliment, but symbolically was a deeply insulting gesture, since the whole point of the summit for I think for the American side was to make sure that King Abdullah understood that the American position that the Gaza plan was going to move forward, there's nothing Jordan can do, was adamant. It was not going to change at all, and nothing King Abdullah could say or do could change that. Most Jordanians by now understand that Trump 2.0 in his second term is a much more I think, visceral and dangerous person than Trump 1.0 in his first term. So to have that president, Trump, issue that video on, on King Abdullah's flight home from Washington, D.C., telling the Jordanian people, and by the way, I love your king. Thanks a lot. Come again next time, was just the icing on the cake, I think, for the Jordanians. I think what makes this all very delicate for Jordan especially, and this is what affects, I think, a lot of other parts of American grand strategy in the region, is that we often underestimate how important Jordan has been to U.S. grand strategy and to Israel just in the last few years of regional affairs. This goes beyond Jordan's role in shooting down those Iranian drones and missiles heading towards Israel in October of last year. The U.S. has thousands of troops and spies and contractors based in Jordan. So do NATO forces. NATO's only Middle East office is in Jordan, right? The Germans, the British, the French, they all operate their own bases there, not to mention the Americans. If the West ever goes to war against Iran, Jordan is now the front line. Right. So the idea that the U.S. could dangle or threaten Jordan by withholding potentially its $1.5 billion of annual economic and military aid, which was part of Trump's cudgel against King Abdullah, and at the same time use Jordan as a client state, essentially as a kind of as a terrestrial aircraft carrier, basing its armada of drones and radar and just military forces there for the purpose of controlling that part of the region more tightly, to me is just it's an untenable contradiction. So we have to square that alongside what just happened a month ago, where the King of Jordan comes to Washington. And by the way, King Abdullah has been the first Arab head of state to visit every American president since the Obama years. Like, that's how tight the U.S.-Jordanian relationship is. He was beaten to the punch with G.W. Bush only by Hosni Mubarak. Okay, so this is a very intimate relationship. So the idea that all of this is happening, strategically, all of this we should keep in the forefront of our minds as we kind of digest what just happened a month ago. King Abdullah comes to Washington, makes his annual pilgrimage. He once again is the first Arab head of state to visit a new incoming U.S. president. He leaves very upset, and on his way out, the same U.S. president, the one who's pledging to essentially destroy his kingdom in the long term, is telling his own people, I'm going to eviscerate your economy. You can't control the composition of your society. Your borders are malleable. We're using your territory as essentially a Levantine Bahrain, and we can do whatever we want. But by the way, I love your king. That I couldn't think of a worse insulting parting remark to make. And I think that just goes to show how dangerous Trump is becoming in his second term in office, as Michael, mentioned. And this is week 6. Okay, this is week 6. I don't want to know what month 6 looks like later this year.
Thank you, Sean. I want to turn now to Nancy. You know, when King Abdullah was in the Oval Office in that very difficult on-camera conversation, one of the things he said was, well, let's wait and see what the Egyptians come up with. And shortly after that, the news came out that the Egyptian president canceled his trip to the White House after seeing how the Jordanian king was treated there. What is next for the Egypt plan? How do they go about selling this to Washington? What is the fallout for U.S.-Egyptian relations at this point? How does this move forward in terms of communicating it to the United States?
Well, first of all, it's like I think that the joke in Egypt is like, and again, like these are like the rare moments where the Egyptians are praising a decision of President Sisi, and they thought, like after the meeting with King Abdullah, like a lot of people were saying that's very wise from the Egyptian president that he did not go to Washington, but after the meeting with President Zelensky, there was like saying that this is the most genius thing that that President Sisi did. It's just like not going there, understanding the trap and the possibility of the optics of it even, and this is something that is like the president has been like President Sisi been really keen on, is like our image in front of our people and what it means. And how do we move forward? It's sadly, even if the position of the Egyptians will remain the same as is like, if they have the will, that they would oppose this. But unfortunately, they don't have the levers. Egypt is basically a vessel for Saudi Arabia, and it is the Gulf states with their money, with their power, are the ones who are able to do that. They are the ones also who are in conversation with the United States since the Biden administration on the Saudi-US defense deal, dubbed as Saudi-Israeli normalization, which is, I don't know how anyone is talking about this with any seriousness. I think like Egypt's chance is actually that communicating with the Israelis that this is not really a good idea for the Israeli security. And it's very pathetic and sad to think that this is the only way, or even like the most realistic tool or argument against this movement and everything that was like obscenely and illegally described as the Trump plan, and also, again, as Sean eloquently explained it, like from what it means, like from the Jordanian side, imagine also it is like what it is like from the Egyptian side, and that's why, this is why we have been saying for a long time that Gaza is a central conflict, but it is also a symptom of the rest of the region, because like the idea of sovereignty and legitimacy is only like a very thin shell around like those Arab states because of their situation, and because of that they are in this helpless situation right now.
Thank you, Nancy. Michael, very briefly, I want to put this question to you. I'm so glad you raised the framework of protection, and I want to ask you to put your hat on as a sort of scholar of genocide and mass atrocities. What is the relationship between forced displacement schemes and genocide? And how dangerous is the normalization of these kinds of ideas in terms of becoming a sort of pretext for even greater violence?
It's very dangerous. I mean, I see this all on a scale of, or spectrum of dehumanization, that these kinds of things become possible once you dehumanize another population, once you see them as subhuman of some sorts, with no rights, no emotions, nothing really to redeem them, and therefore they can be easily moved or killed without much thought. And so it is dangerous. This relationship between, as you ask, between ethnic cleansing and genocide, you can have lots of ethnic, the cleansing can come without killing. It can be very much, as we say, forced at gunpoint, perhaps, as the region knows, and as has happened over many episodes since the end of the Cold War, namely in Bosnia Herzegovina in the 90s. And so I would see both as a means to an end, which is to empty the land of the population. So they can and you might want to think about maybe ethnic cleansing as a stepping stone, as a gateway drug to genocide, but it can actually happen, I think, very much independently or in tandem, one reinforcing the other. Either way, it is a very dangerous step, as we see. And I think it all begins with a complete dehumanization of another population. It also, I just want to say, in terms of back to you at Trump and U.S. foreign policy, it's very difficult to know what Trump's interests are. They're certainly not American interests. The two are nowhere in the same ballpark. But Trump's worldview is becoming very clear now, which is one that might makes right. This is not a view that is complicated by ethical or moral reasoning. And the other is, I would just say, it's a very clear colonial mentality. I mean, this goes back to what Nancy said about sort of the absence of treating territoriality or sovereignty of the Arab states very seriously. And so all of this is, it is such a scary moment in which we live.
Thank you, Michael. I want to bring in a number of different questions that we've received from viewers here, including from Facebook and also on the chat here. And I'll tie a few of them together. These are related to President Trump's handling of the negotiations around the ceasefire. One question asks whether or not this is just part of a negotiating tactic, like his approach to tariffs, for example. The way that he is talking about Palestinians in Gaza, and also, how can we, square the statements being made by the president as recently as yesterday on social media about, immediately releasing the hostages or else, alongside the news that has come out that the White House has confirmed that they seem to be, for the first time ever, negotiating directly with Hamas, something that has long been taboo in U.S. policy. So if anyone can react to these different ideas and questions.
I guess I'd be happy to take a stab. Fools rush in, I guess. It's very hard to tell, if there's, a grand Mr. Evil mastermind that's sitting behind this and, has an ability like the Wonderful Oz to actually manipulate things to keep us entertained, but also to keep us in a permanent state of confusion and distraction. And that's certainly been the tactic over the last 6 weeks, which is to throw as much as you can out into the environment to leave us, unable to focus on any one thing, and quite uncertain about what really is going on. So I think misdirection is the name of the game here. And, trying to figure out the ratio between signal and noise is incredibly hard. My sense is that, some things like the ceasefire negotiations were a tactic designed to actually enable the kinds of things that we're seeing now. And that even negotiations with Hamas, who knows what they're negotiating over? I don't think many people believe that somehow Trump can do more to the Palestinians than the Israelis have managed to do over the last 18 months. But who also knows what's going on with Hamas and whether some kind of deal could be broken, but I don't even know what that would be.
Just to follow up on what Michael said, is like really happy he brought in like the concept of separating the signal from the noise, and how confusing that. But we can track back, I mean, like all the decisions that Trump made and statements. I mean, like there's one thing, I mean, he does exaggerate. He loves the idea that every other day, like he just like throws a bomb for people to react to it. And even before the State of the Union is like saying, I'm going to have a big surprise. And there was nothing. I mean, it is a distracting and effective tactic. Well, let's see something. I mean, effectively, Trump has been, I know a lot of people say it's only been 6 weeks, but Trump has been effectively acting as president right after the elections from Mar-a-Lago, having the world leaders going and just like to go and bow from him. And because of his promises, before, I mean, like after the elections, there were a lot of like Israelis like dancing in the streets, singing that this is 2025 is the year of the annexation. I mean, it's just like celebrating because this is like what they inferred from Trump, and they were like celebrating Trump's win. Then comes January, and Witkoff have this visit with Netanyahu and comes out with the ceasefire agreement. And there was a complete meltdown from the far right in Israel. Just like they were in shock of what I was actually like in the region at that time. And just like the shift in the mood was really difficult. Then coming to actual, I mean, like specific actions. The first thing that Trump did on January 26th, on his inauguration, is rescinding the sanctions that were imposed on the settlers by the Biden administration. So this is like was a clear signal of a green lighting what was supposed to be something that we're moving actually in a direction of like sanctioning settlers. The second thing is like just yesterday and now, I mean, Smotrich, I mean, the finance minister, who is like the biggest advocate of annexation, was meeting with the Treasury Secretary of the Trump administration. They came out with a picture together and talking about collaboration around the economy and finance and technology policy. So again, this is like, if we're looking at actual decisions, it is certainly not going in the direction that is like just about ceasefire and containing the problem and the issue and wrapping up this war as Trump has claimed at the beginning, is like putting himself as the peacemaker. In terms of negotiating directly with Hamas, we don't know what they're saying, but also it has signaling something. This like sidelining the Egyptians and the Qataris as a central actor in these negotiations. I mean, this is really significant when they're doing that. Maybe it's like more direct and may just like be eliminating all the other factors, or they were not. But this is really significant in just like sidelining the central role that Qatar and Egypt were playing and acting directly. Again, just like it's another signal of like what really the level of power that the Arab states have in this new dynamic under Trump.
Thank you, Nancy. We have time for just one more question to try to address briefly, and I want to bring in an actor that we haven't discussed much in this conversation. We touched on Jordan and Egypt, the broader Arab world, the Palestinians, the United States, but this question relates to the Europeans, which of course have historically played an important role at different junctures of this issue as financiers, as supporters in the diplomatic process, what have you. And this question comes to us and asks, what do we make of the silence from the EU side at this time? Obviously, the Europeans have their hands full at the moment, but what role for Europe is there at this time?
Well, I mean, I want to listen to the rest of the panelists about this, but I mean, they are really in a very difficult situation right now. Not that they have been effective in the past, but right now, I think the impact of Trump's direction and approach is one thing. He raised the cost of anyone opposing him. The cost of opposition for Trump means tariffs, means it's just like weakening of the economy. And right now, it's like, I think if there's any priority issue that the European countries are busy with, is the aftermath of the Oval Office with Zelensky, what it means, and the increase of the financial obligations as well, and not just like vis-a-vis like their commitments to NATO, but also in terms of how they can provide support for Ukraine in the absence of possibility of at least the same commitment that was under Biden and the prioritization of Ukraine. And also, I mean, like the fear of like the sort of the rapprochement between the United States and Russia that is like changing the calculations of a lot of countries in Europe, and again, like what are their levers? I mean, it's almost non-existent right now, and certainly not their biggest priority. Of course, people always, I mean, come to see the region as a priority only when it represents an existential threat to other countries.
I'm just gonna quickly come in just to sort of just add to that point. I mean, I agree with Nancy, the fact that the Europeans have been quite muted is likely because they are focused on the damage that Trump could do on other fronts. But I think that's also not to rule out the possibility that some states have indirectly supported this plan and a lot of the actions we've seen over the last month. I mean, just to note the most recent example, the EU statement that condemned Hamas for not accepting the extension of the ceasefire and allowing the starvation of 2 million Gazans. Obviously making no mention of the state that was actually committing what, by all definitions, amounts as a war crime.
Thank you for that, and thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and for our audience. We'll have to leave it there for today. And again, I want to thank the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University for co-hosting this event with us. Thanks again to you all. We hope you have a great day, and please continue to follow the work of the Institute as well as the Arab Center. Thank you.